Just after midnight on June 12, 1963, in a house in Jackson, Mississippi, 3 kids are losing a fight against bedtime, waiting for their father to walk through the door. Hours earlier, President Kennedy had gone on national television and called civil rights a moral crisis. No sitting president had ever said that on air before. Their mother, Merle, let them stay up to watch it. It felt like something worth staying up for. Then they hear his car pull into the driveway. Medgar Evers, stepping out with an armload of t-shirts from an NAACP rally. Each one reads, "Jim Crow must go. He's alone." He never makes it to the door. From a honeysuckle thicket across the street, roughly 150 feet away, someone is watching through the scope of a rifle. One shot. The bullet goes through his back, through his chest, through the living room window, through an interior wall. It ricochets off the fridge and lands on the kitchen counter. Inside, the kids feel the house shake. Merle throws open the front door and finds him face down in the driveway, dragging himself toward the house. The children run outside screaming for him to get up. Neighbors load him into a station wagon and race him to the hospital. He's initially turned away because of his race. By the time he's admitted, it's too late. Medgar Evers dies within the hour. He's 37 years old. The next morning, police search the thicket where the shot came from. They find the rifle, a sporterized 1917 Enfield, the kind a former serviceman might modify himself. Mounted on top of it, a telescopic sight, and on that sight, one clear, unmistakable fingerprint. Within hours, investigators have more than a print. Neighbors had noticed a car parked near the house for days before the shooting. A cab driver comes forward with a story about a man asking directions to the Evers address. This isn't speculation. This isn't circumstantial. A weapon, a print, a vehicle, a witness. In most courtrooms, that's a trial that lasts days, not years. This wasn't most courtrooms. This was Mississippi in 1963, and the man that fingerprint pointed to would walk free. Within a few years, his hometown would treat him like a hero. To understand how that happened, you have to go back, not to the thicket, not to the fingerprint. Back to a boy in Decatur, Mississippi, staring at a dead man's blood-stained clothes left hanging on a fence because someone wanted him to see it. Medgar Wiley Evers was born July 2, 1925, in Decatur, Mississippi, the third of 4 children, to James and Jessie Evers. Working-class parents who drilled 2 values into their kids above everything else: education and financial independence. In Mississippi, just wanting those 2 things was defiance. Decatur made sure the Evers children understood the rules early. When Medgar is still a boy, a family friend is lynched. Afterward, the man's bloodied clothing is left hanging on a fence, not hidden, not taken down. Left there for weeks, deliberately, until the fabric rotted where it hung. It's a message aimed at the entire black community, and Medgar sees it. He carries that image for the rest of his life. He walks 12 miles each way to attend a segregated school. He and his older brother Charles grow up watching exactly what Mississippi thinks they're worth and quietly deciding Mississippi is wrong. In 1943, at 18, Evers was inducted into the United States Army. He serves in a segregated unit, fights across France during the Normandy campaign, and sees some of the worst combat of the European theater. Black soldiers fight in separate units, eat in separate mess halls, sleep in separate barracks. Same risk of dying as anyone else, then home to a country that treats them like less. Evers was honorably discharged as a sergeant in 1945. He helped liberate a continent from fascism. He comes home to a state that won't let him drink from the same water fountain as a white man. He'll later put it plainly: they survived the Germans, they survived the Japanese, and it looked like Mississippi might be the one to finish the job. That contradiction doesn't stay theoretical for long. In 1946, Medgar, Charles, and a group of fellow black veterans decided to test it directly. They register to vote in Decatur. They fill out every form. They follow every rule. On election day, they put on their best clothes and walk to the polls. These men who'd just risked their lives for their country, walking up to do the most basic thing a citizen can do. An armed white mob is waiting for them. Not the police, not officials, civilians, standing between the veterans and the ballot box. The Evers brothers and every man with them are turned away at gunpoint. Not one of them votes that day. The message is unmistakable. Your service means nothing here. Your citizenship means nothing here. It doesn't break Medgar Evers, it focuses him. From that day, he knows exactly what he's going to spend his life doing, and exactly what it's going to cost him. Evers channels that focus into one thing, taking on the system that turned him away at gunpoint. He enrolls at Alcorn Agricultural and Mechanical College, where he meets an 18-year-old student named Merle Beasley. She sees an ambition in him bigger than anything Mississippi was built to allow. They marry on Christmas Eve, 1951. After graduation, Evers applies to the University of Mississippi Law School. He's rejected because of his race. That rejection lands right after the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board ruling struck down school segregation, and it puts him directly on the NAACP's radar. In December 1954, at 29 years old, Medgar Evers becomes the organization's first field secretary for the entire state of Mississippi. No exaggeration, it's one of the most dangerous jobs a black man could hold in the country at that time. He drives more than 42,000 miles in his first 3 years alone, crisscrossing the state to organize voter registration drives and investigate racial violence. When 14-year-old Emmett Till is abducted and murdered in the Mississippi Delta in 1955, Evers is one of the people tracking down witnesses. He advises James Meredith through the 1962 integration of Ole Miss. Federal troops end up on campus. 2 people die in the riots. By the spring of 1963, he's running a full civil rights campaign in Jackson, boycotts, sit-ins, and a sit-in at a Woolworth's lunch counter. It turns into one of the ugliest confrontations of the entire movement, a white mob attacking demonstrators while police just watch. Mississippi has a name for what Evers is doing. They call it agitation. What he's actually doing is asking the state to follow its own laws and asking black Mississippians to believe they have rights worth acting on. In 1963 Mississippi, that's the most dangerous idea a person can spread. His name has been on a death list since 1955, not a figure of speech. White supremacist groups kept an actual list, black leaders marked for assassination. Threats arrive by phone, by mail, in person. Strange cars follow Myrlie when she drives the children to school. Sometimes the people following her were the police. In late May 1963, weeks before the murder, someone throws a Molotov cocktail into the family's carport. The fire could reach the house. The children are asleep inside. Myrlie puts it out herself with a garden hose. Days later, a car swerves directly at Medgar in a parking lot, missing him narrowly. He reports it. Nothing happens. The Evers family builds their whole life around one assumption: an attack is coming. Medgar and Myrlie sleep with guns within reach. Their 3 children, Daryl's 9, Rena's 8, little James is 3, are drilled on exactly what to do if they hear gunfire. Drop to the floor, crawl to the bathroom. Get into the cast iron bathtub. It's heavy enough to stop a bullet. It's the safest place in the house. In his final days worn down, Evers tells Myrlie something she'll carry for the rest of her life. "I'm so tired. I don't think I can go on. But I can't stop." He's already told friends he expects to be killed for the work he's doing. He was right, and the man who would make sure of it already had a fingerprint on file, a rifle in his possession, and a hometown that was about to prove exactly how far it would go to protect him. If stories like this, the ones buried by the very system that was supposed to prevent them, keep you watching till the end, that's exactly what we do here on Crimescale. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The fingerprint on the rifle scope is matched through military records within days. It belongs to Byron De La Beckwith, a 42-year-old fertilizer salesman from Greenwood, Mississippi. Beckwith is orphaned young. His father dies when he's 5, his mother when he's 12. An uncle raises him in Greenwood, deep in the Mississippi Delta, a world that tells him every single day that his whiteness makes him superior. He enlists in the Marine Corps in 1942. Fights at Guadalcanal, gets wounded at the brutal Battle of Tarawa, comes home in 1945, a decorated veteran, same as the man he'd later be accused of killing. But where Evers came home and organized for equality, Beckwith came home and organized against it. The 1954 Brown ruling radicalizes him. He joins the White Citizens Council in Greenwood, sometimes called the Country Club Clan. Bankers, lawyers, businessmen. No open violence, just economic and political pressure to keep segregation in place. Beckwith goes further, aligning himself with the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, the most violent Klan faction in the South. He's not quiet about any of it. He writes letters to the newspaper defending segregation, no hiding it, no coding it. He tells people there are only 3 kinds of people in Mississippi, and very little of the third kind is worth anything at all. Investigators build a case against him fast. Beyond the fingerprint, they confirm he owns the Enfield rifle, though he claims it was stolen. His white Plymouth Valiant is placed near the Evers home in the days before the murder. A cab driver says Beckwith asked him for directions to Evers's address. That points at him, too. He's arrested 11 days after the killing, on June 23, 1963. With that much evidence, this case should be over in days. It isn't, because Mississippi in 1963 isn't playing by those rules. Beckwith goes to trial twice, both in 1964. Both times, the outcome is already decided, before a single witness takes the stand. Mississippi's juries are drawn from voter rolls, and black citizens have been systematically excluded from voter registration since 1890. That means every juror is white, every juror is male, and many come from communities where the White Citizens Council quietly runs civic life. The council itself pays for Beckwith's defense, providing him 3 of the state's best attorneys, free of charge. The prosecution's case is strong: the fingerprint, the rifle, the car, the cab driver's testimony. The defense's answer is an alibi. 2 former Greenwood police officers claim they saw Beckwith at a gas station, 90 miles from Jackson the night of the murder. No one else corroborates it. Both juries deadlock. Both trials end in mistrial. During the second trial, Former Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett, the same man who once tried to physically block James Meredith from enrolling at Ole Miss, walks into the courtroom and shakes Beckwith's hand. Some accounts place this while Murley herself is on the witness stand. Everyone in that room gets the message. The most powerful man in the state just told Beckwith, "I'm with you." By 1969, the charges are formally dropped. Beckwith doesn't just walk free, he thrives. He runs for lieutenant governor on an openly segregationist platform in 1967. He loses. But think about that, a man tried twice for assassination, running for statewide office. That alone tells you what Mississippi was willing to tolerate. And through the years that follow, Beckwith does something that will eventually undo him completely. He can't stop talking about what he did. At a 1965 Klan rally, to a former tenant, to a woman he's introduced to as the man who killed Medgar Evers, openly, proudly, repeatedly, never realizing he's building the exact case that will one day put him away for life. But that case doesn't get built for another 25 years, and it doesn't start with a detective. It starts with a state secret buried in a file cabinet the government of Mississippi never intended anyone to open. By 1989, Beckwith has been a free man for a quarter century. The Evers case is dead, filed away, forgotten by everyone except the family. Then a 30-year-old reporter at the Jackson Clarion-Ledger starts pulling a thread. Jerry Mitchell isn't a civil rights historian. He's got sources inside Mississippi's state government. And those sources point him toward records the state has spent decades trying to keep sealed, the files of the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission. The state legislature created it in 1956, officially to protect Mississippi's sovereignty. Its real purpose? Preserve segregation, using the full authority of state government. It's a spy agency for segregation, tailing civil rights workers, photographing their meetings, writing down license plates, building files on tens of thousands of people. It recruits black informants to infiltrate civil rights organizations from the inside. It funnels public money directly to the White Citizens Council. By the time it's abolished in 1977, it has assembled roughly 132,000 pages on more than 87,000 names, sealed by law for 50 years. Mitchell finds a way in anyway, and buried in those files is something that changes the entire shape of the Evers case. During Beckwith's 1964 trials, the Hinds County DA is publicly prosecuting him. At the same time, a different arm of that same state government, the Sovereignty Commission, is secretly working with his defense. Commission investigators use state resources to screen the jury pool. They flag which jurors would sympathize with a white supremacist defendant. Then they hand that intel straight to Beckwith's attorneys. Think about what that means. The state of Mississippi wasn't just failing to convict Beckwith, it was actively working against its own prosecution. Those two hung juries in 1964 weren't the result of weak evidence, they were engineered. Mitchell's story runs on October 1st, 1989. The response is immediate. The day after publication, Murley Evers goes public and calls for the case to be reopened. She's been waiting 25 years for exactly this kind of opening. The story is no longer about whether the evidence was strong enough. It's about a state government caught sabotaging its own murder case, and now that sabotage is on paper, in the state's own files. A young Hinds County assistant prosecutor reads Mitchell's story and can't put it down. His name is Bobby DeLaughter, and he's about to find out that having the truth is nothing compared to having a case. If this story's got you leaning in, hit that like button. It's a small thing, but it tells us to keep digging up cases exactly like this one. Bobby DeLaughter is 9 years old when Medgar Evers is killed. He doesn't even hear the name until after law school. But when his boss asks him to look into the Sovereignty Commission's jury tampering allegations, DeLaughter starts reading, and the deeper he goes, the more the case consumes him. Mississippi has no statute of limitations on murder. Legally, Beckwith can still be tried. The question is whether a 30-year-old case can be rebuilt from almost nothing. And almost nothing undersells it. The original district attorney's case file is missing. Nobody can account for where it went. There's no official trial transcript on record anywhere in the Mississippi court system. The physical evidence, including the bullet that killed Evers, was never properly retained. There's no autopsy report. DeLaughter is trying to prosecute a decades-old murder with no case file and no evidence locker. The first break comes from the one person who never stopped preparing for this exact moment. Back in 1964, Murley Evers was afraid the trial records would get lost or destroyed. So, without telling anyone, she kept her own complete copy of both transcripts, stored it for decades, waiting. Without those pages, there's no way to reconstruct what witnesses testified to in 1964, and no foundation for a new case. The entire reinvestigation rests on documents one woman refused to throw away. The second break is the rifle. The 1917 Enfield that killed Evers had vanished from the evidence locker years earlier. DeLaughter traces it, and the answer is closer to home than he ever expected. The judge who'd presided over one of the 1964 trials had taken the rifle home as a souvenir, kept it in his own closet for decades. That judge was Russell Moore, DeLaughter's own father-in-law. He checks the serial number against the original records. It matches. In June 1991, Evers's body is exhumed from Arlington National Cemetery for a new autopsy. The original report had vanished, like everything else. Pathologist Michael Baden finds the remains remarkably well preserved, well enough to fully document the wound and the bullet's path. With the transcript recovered, the rifle confirmed, and the forensic evidence reassembled, DeLaughter turns to the piece of the case that doesn't exist yet: living people willing to testify, under oath, that they personally heard Byron De La Beckwith brag about the murder. 6 of them are still alive, still willing to talk. What they're about to say on the stand will do more damage to Beckwith than any physical evidence ever could. Over months of investigation, DeLaughter and his team tracked down 6 people prepared to testify that Beckwith bragged to them personally about killing Medgar Evers. Marianne Adams says she was introduced to Beckwith in 1966 with the words, "This is the man who killed Medgar Evers." She testifies that he didn't deny it, didn't deflect. He owned it. Dan Prince, Beckwith's former tenant, testifies that Beckwith talked about the murder like it was a finished chore. Said it bothered him less than childbirth bothers a woman. Delmar Dennis was a former Klan member, secretly working as an FBI informant. He describes a 1965 Klan rally where Beckwith told the whole room the killing hadn't caused him any trouble at all, using a racial slur for his victim, right in front of the crowd. Dennis was taking notes the entire time. Dick Davis, another former Klan informant, backs it up. Inside Klan circles, Beckwith wore the killing like a badge, proof he was a man of action. Peggy Morgan, who'd known Beckwith for years, testifies that he told her the same thing in plain terms, that he'd killed Evers and didn't regret it. No hedging, no ambiguity. Just a man stating a fact about himself. And the prosecution saves its strongest witness for last. Mark Riley, a former prison guard, testifies that Beckwith used the Evers murder as a direct threat against him. If he could get rid of someone like Medgar Evers, Beckwith told him, he could handle someone like Riley just as easily. It isn't a boast. It's a warning, delivered by a man who wanted Riley to understand exactly who he was dealing with. Beckwith spent 30 years running his mouth, and every person he bragged to just became a witness against him. By December 1990, a Hinds County grand jury has already re-indicted him for murder. Beckwith, now in his early 70s and living in Tennessee, fights extradition for nearly 10 months. When he's finally returned to Mississippi, his attorneys throw every motion they've got at killing the case before trial. Speedy trial violation, due process violation, double jeopardy after 2 prior trials. The double jeopardy argument is the strongest card in his hand, but it has one fatal flaw. Double jeopardy only protects you from being tried again after an acquittal. Beckwith was never acquitted. Both 1964 trials ended in mistrials, hung juries, not verdicts of not guilty. The door was never actually closed. Late 1992, the Mississippi Supreme Court rules barely that the retrial can go forward. Their logic? The state sabotaged its own case. It doesn't get to turn around now and say too much time has passed. 4 years after he first read Jerry Mitchell's story, Bobby DeLaughter is about to walk into a courtroom and finish what 2 juries in 1964 were never allowed to. Before we get to that verdict, if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. What happens next is the payoff, 31 years in the making. January 1994, Hinds County Courthouse, Jackson, Mississippi. 31 years after a bullet tore through Medgar Evers' back, the case of Mississippi versus Byron De La Beckwith goes to trial for the 3rd and final time. Jury selection begins in late January, the pool drawn from Panola County. For the first time in the case's history, the panel actually reflects the population of the state. 8 black jurors, 4 white, 7 women, 5 men. Some were children themselves in 1963. Some had parents who lived through everything Evers fought for and everything he fought against. Testimony begins January 27th. Merle Evers is the prosecution's first witness. She walks into that courtroom for a 3rd time and describes the worst night of her life. The Kennedy speech. The kids begging to stay up. The car in the driveway. The crack of the rifle. Opening the door. Finding Medgar there. 31 years later, she hasn't forgotten a single detail. It isn't rehearsed. It's lived. DeLaughter methodically rebuilds the physical case. The rifle. The fingerprinted scope. An enhanced photo of Beckwith's Plymouth Valiant, matching what witnesses described back in 1963. Some of the 1964 witnesses are dead by now. So other people stand up and read their old testimony, word for word, straight from Merle's transcript. Then come the 6 witnesses: Adams, Prince, Dennis, Davis, Morgan, and Riley, laying out 3 decades of Beckwith's own bragging, one testimony at a time, ending with Riley's account of a direct threat. One observer said it landed like a hammer in a silent courtroom. Beckwith does not take the stand. Given how many people he's confessed to over the years, his attorneys likely decide the risk isn't worth it. The defense falls back on the same alibi from 1964. Same two former officers. Same gas station story. 90 miles away. And in 30 years, still nobody new has backed it up. De Laughter's closing argument asks the jury one question: is it ever too late to do the right thing? The 12 jurors deliberate for 7 to 8 hours across 2 days. At one point, the vote sits at 8 to 4, and the possibility of a third hung jury hangs over the room. They're sequestered overnight. Inside the jury room, the foreman, a 70-year-old minister, leads the group in prayer. Not for a specific verdict, for clarity. On February 5th, 1994, the jury returns. The foreman reads it aloud. Guilty, unanimous. 12 jurors, one voice. Medgar Evers weeps in the courtroom. Beckwith, 73 years old, is sentenced to life in prison. He shows no remorse. The conviction closes one chapter of this story. Beckwith isn't finished fighting it, and the case's reach is far from finished either. Beckwith's appeals argue the 31-year delay denied him a fair trial. In 1997, the Mississippi Supreme Court disagrees. They uphold the conviction and point straight at the state's own role in sabotaging the original prosecution. The United States Supreme Court declines to hear the case. Byron De La Beckwith dies in custody on January 21, 2001. He's 80 years old. He spent his last 7 years in prison for a murder he committed 38 years earlier and bragged about for most of the years in between. For Medgar Evers, the verdict is a transformation. She tells reporters she no longer has to call her husband's killer accused. She can finally say convicted. In 1995, she becomes the first woman to chair the national NAACP, winning by a single vote. She spends the next 3 years pulling the organization back from financial collapse. She founds the Medgar Evers Institute. On January 21, 2013, 50 years after her husband's death, and exactly 12 years after Beckwith died in his cell, she delivers the invocation at President Obama's second inauguration. First woman ever to do it. First layperson, too. This conviction proves something nobody had proven before. A cold case from the civil rights era, one this old, could actually be won. It becomes a template, and the dominoes start falling. Jerry Mitchell keeps digging. Domino 2, 1998. Sam Bowers, Imperial Wizard of the White Knights, convicted for ordering the 1996 firebombing that killed NAACP leader Vernon Dahmer. Dominoes 3 and 4, 2001 and 2002. Thomas Blanton and Bobby Frank Cherry, convicted for the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, the one that killed 4 young girls. Domino 5, 2005. Edgar Ray Killen, convicted of manslaughter for orchestrating the 1964 murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, the case the world came to know as Mississippi Burning. Mitchell later receives a MacArthur Genius Grant for the work. Every single one of those convictions traces back to the same starting point: one reporter's story and one widow who refused to let a closed case stay closed. Congress eventually passes the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act, a federal framework for reopening cold cases from that era. It exists because of the momentum this case started. Bobby De Laughter becomes a national figure. Alec Baldwin plays him in a 1996 film. He's eventually appointed to the bench as a judge. Then, in 2008, he's suspended from the bench. In 2009, he's indicted on federal corruption charges tied to a scandal involving a disgraced trial lawyer, and later that year, pleads guilty to obstruction of justice, loses his law license, and serves 18 months in federal prison. The man who rebuilt a murder case from nothing ends his own career the way he helped put Beckwith away in a cell. None of that erases what the jury said. The fingerprint was real. The witnesses were real. Beckwith's own bragging was real. The conviction stands exactly as the jury delivered it. Medgar Evers is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His grave faces Washington, D.C., the city where, decades later, the laws he died fighting for finally became the law of the land. He once said, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." Mississippi killed the man. It took 31 years. The idea won anyway.